I'm Todd Raffel with ERE Media. We're at ERE.net in case you're watching this video embedded somewhere. And I'm here with Lisa Chartier. Lisa Chartier works for Alexander Mann, a large and global recruitment outsourcing company, recruiting consulting company, particularly outsourcing company, recruitment process outsourcing company. And Lisa and I are talking about turning candidates down. Both the lack of communication between companies to employees who get turned down, as well as the lack of telling people why, if you do tell people why they got turned down, the lack of telling people why they were turned down. This is an old topic, but the more I talk to job candidates, the more I hear it's actually gotten worse, not better, that people go through a couple rounds of interviews, are told in some cases they're really well liked and whatnot, and then they never hear from the company again, one way or the other. It's like the company just disappears, and apparently this happens all the time. So my question for you, Lisa, is why does this happen? Is it like they're scared of the law, the legal issues, or are they scared of just, are they overwhelmed by time, or something else?
Yeah, I think that there's, a slew of answers to that. I think what it comes down to is, yes, lack of time, but also the investment in the resources to manage such a process. And when I say investment, it's not just financial, but also the manpower, the investment in time and technology that actually makes this process much easier to aid in those communications. And I think what it comes down to is from the top down, a company's brand values, and are they living those brand values through the entire recruitment process? When it comes to prioritizing, it's one, seeing talent as not necessarily a cost to their business, but an investment that's necessary to both keep their business moving forward from an innovation perspective, but also according to some of the recent research that we've done at AMS, over 50% of candidates would actually not buy a company's product or services if they had a bad candidate experience, which when you think about it, that's significant risk to a company's bottom line. And it's all about that mindset that, candidates aren't a nuisance. Candidates aren't something that your recruiting team has to bring in the door. And it's just one more thing for a hiring manager to do in their day. It needs to really be embedded that every single person candidates come in contact with is a brand touch point. Every communication, every chance that you have to engage, it's either going to be a positive one or a negative one, and that feeds back to your consumer proposition.
I imagine also, in addition to the things that you just said, it's just awkward. It's hard to say, it's like dating. You really want to call someone up and say, you know what, I hate to tell you, I just don't like you. It's like an awkward thing to reject someone in any business or personal. And so I imagine there's just a human element to it, whether it's done on the phone, in person, or over email.
Yeah, and I think it's the companies that are able to have that transparency. And like I said, one solution isn't right for every company. It's about saying if a company's brand values are integrity and transparency or collaboration, then they need to find how to bring that to life in the recruitment process. I think it's interesting, as I think there's an article on your site actually recently going through the evolution of recruiting 1.0, 2.0, 3.0. Now we're on the brink of 4.0. And if you look back, 1.0 and 2.0 were very much about the employer. It's all about the processes, the operations for recruiting. Whereas now 3.0 and 4.0, the candidate's beginning to come to the center of that universe because there's so many more tools for them to share their experience with their personal and professional networks, which again, our research has highlighted they're more than willing to do. But I think it's also an opportunity for employers is to take the time, tell them why they didn't get the job, explain where there are gaps in their skills, that keep in touch when you have, when you've refined these skill areas, let's talk again. And we see a lot of companies have employee referral programs. Well, just because I'm not technically an employee, even if I'm a candidate, I still have a very valuable network of talent. And one of the things at AMS that we're working with our clients on is how to almost create candidate referral programs and reward your candidates for maybe they weren't the right fit, but if they're sending great talent your way, whether it's monetary reward, whether it's, a lot of our consumer goods companies that we work with, whether it's sending them some product as a thank you, and really being able to utilize them more for that one role and expanding the value of the candidate beyond that.
Are there any companies, and you just touched on, are there any companies and maybe you can't name them, maybe you can name the sector or the type of companies that do it well. A friend of mine had a good experience at Netflix. He said that they had a good, that he knew where he stood when he went through their hiring process, although he didn't ultimately get hired. And it left him with a good feeling about Netflix. Are there any kind of sectors or types of companies or other kind of just at least general best practices that you can share?
Yeah, to be honest, I can't pinpoint a sector
Yeah.
because even
Okay.
companies within a sector are very diverse. I can tell you that, for example, Philips as a company has a very strong sort of offer to acceptance period where they actually, send flowers and sort of home deliveries to candidates that they've made an offer to and they're waiting for them to accept. Pretty much the majority of companies that we see are successful are the ones that make it very clear at stage one of the process what the candidate can expect, who will be following up with them when, how many rounds of interviews do they have to go to, have a debriefing with the recruiter after each of those different steps. And again, it's not rocket science to figure out a process. It just takes that commitment within the company to realize the value of the candidate, the value of a solid recruitment process, and just ensure that there's a solid communication strategy around it.
You mentioned recruiting 1.0 and 2.0 and 3.0 up to 4, and articles that have been on ERE by Matt Jeffrey, and that leads us into social media. Is there any role that social media has in this? And let me give you an example of what I'm trying to say. I saw a blog post, I think it was about a week ago, where someone was describing, I think the job was like a social media community manager, and the company was describing why they hired the person that they did. And actually it was a nice post-mortem as to the hiring process, because although I don't know whether they sent an email to all of the rejected applicants and said, hey, here's a story of our hiring process, but nonetheless, if you read the blog post, you would say to yourself, oh, okay, I see why they were hired. Maybe you think you should have been hired and not them, but you see who was hired, why that made sense to them, and you got some information about the ultimate hire. Not a rejection letter, but I thought that was a nice use of social media to communicate why a person in general could be rejected, if not each individual, why everyone separately was rejected. Have you heard of or have any thoughts on the other social media practices that play into turning people down?
Yeah, definitely. I think it all comes back to the fundamental of social media, which is this idea of building communities. And within those communities, you can quickly and easily share information, elicit information, and really begin to crowdsource within all of these areas. So I think first and foremost, employers need to actually use that for what it is and begin crowdsourcing and begin listening to what candidates want as an ideal process to go through as they look to join their next company, and then marry that obviously with the compliance mandates and HR operations and so forth on the front end. And then on the back end, we're seeing things like I mentioned, candidate referral programs where, social media is a great way to begin to open up your network and reward them for it. We're beginning to experiment with augmented reality mobile apps where actually as you sort of walk by a Starbucks, you can see what jobs are available and maybe they're not right for you, but with a click of a button, you can share that with your mobile network. So I think it all comes down to the fundamental of building that brand's affinity, and from there, your candidates or potential future employees will then, who already have embraced social media, will use that to their benefit to spread the word about your brand and about your company.
I think the challenge, to loop back to what we were, getting at the outset, the challenge with everything you've just described, which is great, is again the rejected people. Are you carrying that through to people who didn't get the job? Are you sending them? Maybe you're not going to send them the flowers to everyone all the 1,000 people who have applied, like you mentioned, but whatever it is, maybe it's a $5 coffee gift card or whatever it might be. Are you carrying the things that you're talking about through to people who didn't get the job? I think that's kind of the devil in the details.
Exactly. Yeah, and I think companies like obviously consumer goods have it far easier because what they can do is, as our research has shown, that negative candidate experience can then influence their negativity on buying your product. So giving them sort of a sample or a promotional coupon for some product would absolutely be a positive outreach step. For other companies like pharmaceuticals, obviously you're not going to ship them an over-the-counter prescription, but I think there are small tokens, even if it's just, hey, we're hosting a networking lunch on one of our locations for all of, the candidates who have been in our pipeline for the last 6 months.
Yeah.
And at least open it up so they feel part of a community that, even though they may not have gotten a job, they can maybe begin to, build relationships with the company for the future, or build relationships with other candidates who have gone through that same experience as they did.
Or we can close it up, even shy of a small token that you mentioned. The smallest token I would think would be just to let them know, just to say, hey, you didn't get the job.
Absolutely.
At least provide some closure so the person, especially the people I'm hearing who go through a round or two of interviews and get all excited, aren't just sort of hanging. So I think that would be like the minimum would be, hey, you didn't get the job.
Any deliberately well-designed recruitment process will always have that element, even if it's just a white glove administrative resource. That their sole responsibility is reaching out to these declined candidates, explaining the story, trying to build that affinity and that relationship with the candidate. And I think as RPO, as sort of a business and as a viable solution to outsourcing recruitment teams and processes, begins to build in the US, as sort of it's already in its maturing stage in Europe and is ever growing in Asia, as companies begin to actually see the process from end to end and design a team, resources, and a strategy around that. Absolutely, the follow-up piece is a best practice across the board.
Thanks again, Lisa Chartier from Alexander Mann. She referred, if you were curious, she said AMS, Alexander Mann Solutions. She's coming to us from Boston. And again, I'm Todd Raffel with ERE Media. We're at ERE.net. So thanks again.
Thanks, Todd.